In the vast expanse of the Sahara, a war unlike any other erupted. It was not fought with endless divisions of tanks or fleets of jets, but with something far more unexpected: civilian pickup trucks. At the heart of this unlikely story stood two nations: oil-rich Libya under an ambitious dictator and a war-torn Chad struggling for survival. What began as a border dispute soon spiraled into one of the most remarkable conflicts of the late 20th century, where speed, ingenuity, and determination would outmatch sheer military might. This is the story of the Toyota War. In the vast emptiness of the Sahara, one man's ambition would ignite a conflict that few could have predicted. His name was Muammar Gaddafi. In 1969, the young officer seized power in Libya and crowned himself not just as a ruler, but as a visionary who dreamed of reshaping North Africa. To Gaddafi, borders were not lines on a map. They were obstacles to his grand vision of a greater Libya. But to the south lay Chad, a fragile state barely holding together after independence. Its first president, Francois Tambalbaye, was desperate to secure his shaky rule. And when Gaddafi's Libya offered money and promises in exchange for a strip of desert land, the Aouzou Strip, a barren region rumored to hide rich uranium deposits, Tambalbaye agreed. It seemed like a minor deal, a trade of desert sands for survival. But this bargain planted the seeds of chaos. For Gaddafi, the Aouzou Strip was more than just land. It was a foothold for his expansionist dream. For Chad, it became the fuse to years of war, rebellion, and foreign intervention. The Sahara was about to become a battlefield. While Gaddafi plotted in Tripoli, Chad itself was tearing apart from within. Independence had brought not unity, but a storm of rivalries. Since 1965, the young republic had been consumed by civil war as rebel factions clashed with a weak central government. President Francois Tambalbaye, already mistrusted by many of his own people, fought desperately to hold on, but his rule was collapsing under corruption, tribal divisions, and endless uprisings. By the mid-1970s, his grip on power had all but vanished, and with it, Chad spiraled into chaos. Power passed like a torch in the wind, from one warlord or general to the next. Coups toppled governments almost as quickly as they were formed. The country became a battlefield of militias, each with its own backers, each carving out fragments of control. And then, in 1982, a new name emerged: Hissène Habré. Ambitious, ruthless, and unafraid of bloodshed, Habré seized the presidency. He ruled not with diplomacy, but with fear. Stories spread of his enemies lying in mass graves and of torture chambers hidden beneath the capital. For the first time in years, Chad had a single strongman. But his rise would pull Gaddafi even deeper into Chad's war and set the stage for the desert battles to come. By the early 1980s, Gaddafi's shadow loomed large over Chad. He had already poured weapons, money, and advisors into rebel factions, hoping to topple any leader who resisted his vision of a greater Libya. When Hissène Habré took power in 1982, Gaddafi saw an enemy he could not control, a man as ambitious and brutal as himself. Libya struck first. Armed with modern Soviet tanks, artillery, and aircraft, Gaddafi's forces swept into northern Chad. At first, it looked like an unstoppable advance. But Chad would not stand alone. France, determined to keep Gaddafi in check, intervened with troops and air power. The French drew a line across the desert, the 15th parallel. Libya was forced to halt its conquest north of that invisible border, leaving Chad literally divided in two. Habré ruled the south, while Libyan forces entrenched themselves in the north. To the outside world, it looked like a stalemate. But Gaddafi was not finished. Under the cover of supporting a rebel government, he built military bases, airstrips, and fortifications across Chad's occupied territory. And when his rebel allies began to defect, Gaddafi dropped the mask. The Desert War was about to escalate, and France would be drawn back into the fight. The fragile balance could not last. By 1986, The mask was gone. Gaddafi was no longer pretending to be a sponsor of rebels. He was waging open war. Libyan troops surged south, crossing the 15th parallel, determined to crush Habre's government once and for all. But this bold gamble provoked an even bolder response. France, unwilling to let Libya dominate the heart of Africa, launched a second intervention. This time, it wasn't just ground troops. The French Air Force struck hard, bombing Libya's massive air base at Wadi Doum in February 1986. The attack was devastating. Hangars, fuel depots, and radar stations went up in flames. For the first time, Gaddafi's military machine looked vulnerable. Libya had the numbers, the tanks, the aircraft. Chad, by comparison, had almost nothing. Yet with French air power shielding Habre, the war entered a new phase. The skies over Chad now belonged to France. But on the ground, the Libyan army still appeared overwhelming. Thousands of soldiers, Soviet-made armor, and heavy artillery seemed impossible for Chad's ragtag forces to challenge. But the desert was about to change the rules of war, and the weapon that would turn the tide was not a tank or a jet. It was a pickup truck. As the Libyans dug in with tanks and artillery, Chad's chances looked hopeless. Habre's army was brave, but it was outgunned, outnumbered, and seemingly outmatched. Then came a twist no one expected, one that would rewrite the very rules of desert warfare. France supplied Chad with a shipment of 400 civilian Toyota pickup trucks, mostly Hilux and Land Cruiser models. On paper, it looked absurd, farmers' vehicles against Soviet tanks. But when armed with heavy machine guns, rocket launchers, and even anti-tank missiles, these trucks became something new, something deadly. They were fast, able to race across the sand at more than double the speed of a T-55 tank. They were light on fuel, able to travel miles where Libyan armor would stall. And most importantly, they were simple. A local mechanic with a wrench could fix them in hours, while Libyan tanks required specialized crews and endless supplies. These humble Toyotas were transformed into technicals, mobile gun platforms that could outmaneuver, outlast, and outfight the lumbering Libyan war machine. The desert had found its king, and soon the world would witness how a fleet of pickup trucks could bring one of Africa's most powerful armies to its knees. The world first saw the power of the Toyota in January 1987 at a remote outpost called Fada. There, 1,200 Libyan soldiers and 400 Chadian rebels held what they thought was an impregnable position. Tanks dug in, armored vehicles lined up, heavy weapons ready. But at dawn, the silence of the desert was shattered by the roar of engines. Out of the horizon came 3,000 Chadian fighters, each mounted on a Toyota pickup bristling with weapons. They did not march slowly across the sand like tanks. They raced, swarming like a storm. The Libyans never stood a chance. Tank turrets turned too slowly to track the oncoming trucks. Armored vehicles bogged down as the Toyotas zipped past, firing rockets and heavy machine guns at close range. By the end, the results were staggering. 92 Libyan tanks and 33 infantry fighting vehicles destroyed, dozens more captured. The Chadian losses? Just 18 men and 3 Toyotas. The desert had spoken. Speed, agility, and audacity could triumph over steel and firepower. The Battle of Fada was not just a victory. It was the beginning of a legend. From this moment on, the Libyans would never underestimate a pickup truck again. The Libyans reeled from their humiliation at Fada. But Gaddafi still had thousands of troops, hundreds of tanks, and the confidence that numbers alone would crush Chad's fragile army. In March 1987, he sent a new column south, 1,500 soldiers with dozens of tanks, to retake what had been lost. Waiting for them was Chadian commander Hassan Jamous, a master of desert strategy. Instead of meeting the Libyans head-on, he set a trap. The defenses at Fata were deliberately weakened, baiting the Libyans to advance. And advance they did, right into the jaws of an ambush. From all directions, swarms of Toyotas descended, circling the lumbering tanks like wolves around prey. Machine guns rattled, rockets streaked through the air, and within minutes the desert became a killing ground. The Libyans tried to hold their perimeter, but their armor was too slow, their formations too rigid. Reinforcements from the Wadi Duum base rushed to help, only to be ambushed themselves. When the smoke cleared, the scale of destruction was undeniable. 800 Libyan soldiers killed, 86 tanks destroyed, and 13 captured. Chad had achieved another impossible victory. The world was watching, and whispers began to spread. Could a fleet of Toyotas really bring down Gaddafi's army? Fresh from their stunning victories, the Chadians set their sights on the heart of the conflict itself, the Aouzou Strip. This desolate stretch of desert, once sold to Gaddafi by Chad's first president, was now a symbol of Libyan dominance. To Hissène Habré, reclaiming it was not just about territory. It was about proving Chad's independence once and for all. In July 1987, columns of Toyota-mounted fighters roared across the border. Libyan outposts crumbled before them. Ambushes, lightning raids, and relentless speed left Gaddafi's men stunned. Within weeks, the Chadians pushed deep into Aouzou, chasing the Libyans back into the Tibesti Mountains. On August 8th, they struck the town of Aouzou itself. Hundreds of Libyan soldiers were killed, more than 100 vehicles captured, and the strip fell into Chadian hands. It was the boldest triumph yet, an audacious strike into land Gaddafi had long claimed as his own. But Gaddafi would not take this insult lightly. Furious, he mobilized his largest force of the war, 15,000 troops, backed by artillery and armor, to retake Aouzou. For days, shells rained down on the town. Finally, on August 28th, the Libyans stormed in, overwhelming the small Chadian garrison and reclaiming the strip. It was Libya's first victory of the war, but also its last. Libya had finally tasted victory at Aouzou, but it was a hollow one. Habré and his commanders knew they could not let momentum slip. If Chad was to end the war on its own terms, it needed a strike so devastating that even Gaddafi could not ignore it. The target? Maten al-Sara Air Base, deep inside Libyan territory, guarded by nearly 2,500 troops, more than 100 armored vehicles, and surrounded by dense minefields. It was the jewel of Gaddafi's southern defense. To attack it seemed suicidal. But on the night of September 5, 1987, the Toyotas rolled once more. 2,000 Chadian fighters crossed into Libya, engines roaring through the desert darkness. At dawn, they charged straight down the runway, rockets and machine guns tearing into rows of parked aircraft. Explosions lit up the horizon as hangars collapsed and fuel depots erupted in fire. Some said the Toyotas moved so fast that anti-tank mines failed to trigger beneath them. Whatever the truth, Libyan defenses crumbled. By the time it was over, at least 1,000 Libyan soldiers lay dead, dozens of aircraft destroyed, the base itself reduced to smoking ruins. For Chad, it was the ultimate triumph. For Gaddafi, it was the final humiliation. The raid on Maten al-Sara broke the back of Libya's campaign. Gaddafi's dream of a greater Libya lay in ruins, his army shattered by the very forces he once dismissed as ragtag rebels in pickup trucks. Over just 8 months of fighting, Libya had suffered more than 7,500 dead. Chad, against all odds, had lost barely 1,000. The desert had become a graveyard for Gaddafi's ambitions. Humiliated, the Libyan dictator had no choice but to call for a ceasefire. For the first time, he publicly recognized Hissène Habré as the legitimate president of Chad. But one prize still remained in dispute, the Aouzou Strip. To Gaddafi, it was the last symbol of legitimacy. To Habré, it was proof of independence. The guns would fall silent, but the dispute lingered until 1994, when the International Court of Justice ruled in Chad's favor. Reluctantly, Libya withdrew. The strip that had cost so many lives was returned without a single shot fired. The so-called Toyota War had ended, not with the triumph of tanks or jets, but with the speed and audacity of pickup trucks. In the vast emptiness of the Sahara, Chad had defeated one of Africa's most powerful armies, and Gaddafi's empire of sand had crumbled. From the burning sands of the Sahara to the halls of the International Court of Justice, the Toyota War was a conflict that defied every expectation. A superpower armed with tanks, jets, and artillery was humbled by a smaller nation wielding ingenuity, speed, and determination. Chad's victory not only redrew the map of North Africa, but also rewrote the rules of modern desert warfare. In the end, Libya withdrew, and the disputed Aouzou Strip returned to Chad. Yet the true legacy of this war lies in its lesson, that resolve and strategy can outmatch overwhelming force.